Welcome to Flattening the Curve, a podcast to disability advocates. Here, we knock down barriers, one story at a time. I'm your host, John Couchy. Let us begin. Well, I'm very excited today to be joined by my neighbor in the office, our accessibility specialist here at Disability Advocates, Jackson Botsford. How are you doing today, Jackson?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. And you?
Now, Jackson, your main role here over at Disability Advocates is as our accessibility specialist / consultant. With that, you focus a lot on ADA code. You want to give us a little background on what ADA code is?
Well, to be very specific, I deal with the ADA Titles 2 and 3. ADA Title 2 deals with local and state governments and provides guidance on making sure that their services and spaces are accessible to people with disabilities. For instance, one area of Title II is regarding accommodations. Deals a very significant amount with accommodations, such as with public education, transportation, and even the very built environment. Title III takes that beyond the local and state government theater and applies it to commercial and other business spaces.
Okay, so ADA's code titles 2 and 3 are really focusing on the built environment.
Yes, very much so. Beyond accommodations, they take great care to ensure that to outline what an accessible built environment looks like. They provide this with the ADA design standards. They're kind of like building codes, and they provide technical information, specific dimensions, specific examples of where areas that might easily become inaccessible and how best to make those areas accessible.
Now, just to clarify for everybody, the ADA does have 5 titles. Title 1 covers everything to do with employment. Title 4 covers telecommunications, and Title 5 is kind of that miscellaneous junk drawer where you find all those assorted things like thumbtacks, tape, old receipts. We all have one of those drawers at home. Why people always put thumbtacks in them? Never understood. But that's a joke. The miscellaneous section really covers various other protections. But when we're focusing on the accessibility portion of it, you mentioned government state buildings as well as public spaces. What kind of spaces are not covered under ADA code?
Every area that the public is able to access has to be in compliance with the ADA code, the ADA design standards. Any built environment that has been constructed past 2012 must be in compliance with the ADA design standards.
Private residence, though.
Private residences, single unit residences, they are not, the ADA does not apply to those types of spaces though.
And currently at this time, there is no governing law putting out accessibility codes for private residences.
For the most part, yes. For multi-unit housing, there is what's called the Fair Housing Act, and they do apply a lot of the ADA technical standards for multi-resident housing, such as apartment buildings, but not to the same degree.
Wonderful. All right. So when you're going out doing accessibility reviews, you're looking at doorways, pathways, manipulative features. Describe like what that process is of when you're looking at a building and assessing its accessibility.
When looking at a building, I usually start from the outside in, and that usually starts with a parking lot. We take a look at the slopes of the lot itself, the pavement, to make sure that it is even, level, stable, and so that it is able to be used by people with a broad range of disabilities.
Now, if a parking lot was not even, was not level, what's the risk factor with that?
Well, the greatest risk factor is a person with a mobility device, what we call assistive technology, might start rolling in a direction that they don't want to go. They might have difficulty exiting their vehicles. They might lose control of their devices. There are many complications that can arise from having an uneven surface.
Well, uneven surface can increase the chance of injury, and any business or government entity or public space, that's one of the last things that they want is somebody to get injured on their property.
Very much so. And that's partially what the ADA design standards are out there for, to provide that baseline of guidance to help a person ensure that nobody gets hurt or feels alienated, left out, unwelcomed.
Okay. So does the code indicate how many accessible parking spaces a place needs to have?
Yes. Under the ADA, a specific percentage of a parking lot must have what we call designated accessible parking spaces. And it varies depending on the total size of the lot. In order to qualify as an accessible parking space, you need to have the base minimum width of 8 feet and have what we call an access aisle on at least one side. And that measures at least 5 feet wide. Now, we've probably seen this. It's that kind of slash demarcated zone adjacent to the space.
And that is used for?
That is present to provide people with mobility devices the space, the clearance that they need to exit safely from their vehicle.
Space for chairlifts to come down and
very much so, which kind of draws on to another type of accessible space that must also be present. 1 out of every 6 accessible parking spaces must be what's called a van accessible space. And these spaces are generally wider. They have the 8-foot wide parking space width and an 8-foot wide aisle on the side. And that is to provide enough space for a deployable lift or ramp.
Anything else specifically we look for outside?
We always take a look at the sidewalks to make sure that that there is a route present from the accessible parking spaces to the main entrance. Make sure that it isn't too steep, that it is wide enough.
So let's kind of get down to the nitty gritty here. What's the biggest issue you see outside with a lot of places?
There are a couple issues that I frequently encounter out in the public. One, maintenance. A space might be perfectly accessible when it is built. You got a lovely level route. It's wide. It's clear. But over time, parts of that route might become damaged. You might get potholes, cracks, uplifting, or settling that can create a very uncomfortable or even impossible route to navigate if you have a disability.
And I mean, we live in the state of Michigan. We also get the oh so fun obstacle of snow. Yep. Does ADA say anything about that when it comes to maintenance?
Unfortunately, the ADA is a little bit.
I didn't think about snow.
No. Under the ADA, maintenance is as soon as possible. And unfortunately, it doesn't give any stricter guidelines for that.
Yep. But as we know, snow can be a huge barrier in the outside environment, making paths completely inaccessible. So even though code does not say you have to do it, it's really best practice to maintain clean sidewalks and pathways, because you want to talk about risk factor of falling.
Very much so.
Now, okay. We've looked at the parking lot. We've looked at the sidewalk. We're making our way in.
Next, what we take a look at when doing an evaluation of the accessibility of a space are the entrances. Now, under the ADA, we always want to make sure that the doors are a adequate width, at least 32 inches wide. Another thing that we tend to recommend, but unfortunately the ADA does not require, is power doors. Unfortunately, the ADA does not require power doors.
Now, you said at least 32 inches. When we look at the ADA, we're talking really a bare minimum standard.
Very much so.
So is 32 inches the best a company can do?
No. It is important to keep in mind that the ADA was written over 30 years ago, and assisted devices were, specifically powered devices, weren't really a thing back then. However, they've become far more prevalent in today's environment, and as such, those codes, which were written at that early time, might not be sufficient for modern standards. And so we always like to recommend that if you can go beyond those base minimum standards, please do it, because you'll be opening up a space to a far greater number of people.
So when we're talking what the ADA code is, we're talking what the bare minimum that you can do is. But we want you to do better. We want to look at what's modern, what can be more accessible to a much broader audience. So I guess my question is, if 32 is the minimum for a door, what would you recommend for the width of a door?
Well, out on the market, there are various widths of doors available. Specifically, medical facilities have adopted the use in their guidelines, separate from the ADA codes, for wider doors, even from 38 inches wide to even 42 inches wide. So it's not for a lack of product out there. There are options.
See, and this always just reminds me how there is no residential code because, man, I got 24-inch doors to my bathroom and I got broad shoulders. If I'm not paying attention, I walk straight into door frames. But having the wider clearance gives people the opportunity to get in safely and securely. Anything else we pay attention to when it comes to doors?
In addition to that, we are very, very critical of door weights. Under the ADA, interior doors cannot require more than 5 pounds of force to open. And this is so to ensure that persons with strength-related disabilities or balance-related disabilities, a broad range of disabilities, are able to actually get through the door. One of the potential solutions is providing that power door, especially if it is very difficult to make that door lighter.
Okay. Now, is there anything we look at when it comes to like handles?
Yes. Under the ADA, we want to make sure that a person can use door hardware without tight pinching, twisting, or grasping. And that usually takes the form of, instead of a doorknob, you've got a door lever. And a good rule of thumb, in order to determine if a piece of door hardware is accessible, can you use it with an elbow or a fist?
Okay. And I think the great thing about that is it doesn't just benefit an individual who has a specific disability.
Very much so. A person with a stroller, with children, even deliveries passing through that door will easily appreciate having these accessible means of accessing the door, getting through the door.
Now, I'm setting this one up on a tee for you. What do we call that when there's a universal benefit with the design?
What we tend to describe designs that go above and beyond the ADA, we tend to call it universal design or inclusive design.
And I love those terms because that's what we should be doing when we're designing a space is how do we be as inclusive to everybody and how do we have universal benefits for all. So doorways obviously are super important. You can't get into a place without a door. The other thing that I think about when it comes to entrances, and I think it's something a lot of people think of when they think of the ADA. And again, when we're saying ADA, we're not talking about the American Dental Association or the lovely town of Ada. We are talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act. But the thing that I think people most often associate is ramps.
Yes. As I might have mentioned before, we want to make sure that there is a stepless route to each of the public areas that are designed to be accessible to the public. So in order to do that, avoid stairs, use ramps if possible, if you've got a change in level. Under the ADA, slopes shouldn't be more than 1 to 12 or 1 vertical inch of rise for every 12 inches of run. However, that is the base minimum under the ADA. We always recommend having a shallower ramp because even a 1 to 12 slope might be difficult for some people.
And having the least steep ramp means there's going to be less velocity buildup if somebody's rolling down it, less chance for accidents and safer transition, less strength required for manual chairs to make it up. So let's look inside a building. We've seen the parking lot, we've seen the sidewalk, went up the ramp, seen the door, and no, we're just scratching the surface on what we're talking about when it comes to these evaluations, because a door, there's more to it than just the weight and the handle of the door. There's also the angle of which the door opens. There's the clearance space for the door. There's vestibules. Wow, I definitely butchered that word. It's a weird word. People don't say vestibule enough. What else are we looking at inside a building?
Well, we continue into the building, and one of the very common areas that we also focus on are the restrooms. Very commonly used rooms, and we want to make sure that people can use it.
Wait, are you saying everybody poops?
Very much so.
Yeah, everybody needs to use those spaces.
And so we want to make sure that a person can get in with an accessible door, with accessible hardware, and of an accessible weight. We also want to make sure that there is space inside the restroom to maneuver about. And in order to determine that, we want to make sure what's called a turning radius or turning circle is present inside. This is a clear, unobstructed space that measures approximately 60 to 67 inches in diameter. And that's the size of most modern pieces of assistive devices.
And that is used to give somebody the opportunity to turn around, to position themselves as they need to use the restroom.
Very much so, to maneuver around without having to back backwards out of a restroom, which can be very difficult. To be able to maneuver in front of each of the fixtures in a restroom, the sink, the toilets, the grab bars, the dispensers on the walls. We want to make sure that people have clear access to those features.
And in bathrooms, people are often in a vulnerable state, and there is often high chance for accidents. So making sure that there is ample space for somebody to maneuver safely without having to make some risky parkour-like maneuvers to use a bathroom is preferred. Okay. Tell us more.
Well, and continuing on in the vein of the restrooms, we want to make sure that the toilets are of an accessible height. We don't want them really short. That can be very difficult to transfer onto. We want to see that they're between around 17 to 19 inches and have the seat height at that height. In addition, as I mentioned before, we want to see that grab bars are present on the wall behind the toilet and on the wall adjacent. That gives people enough support in order to find a means to transfer onto the toilet.
Wonderful. And I know, because I've gone through training with you, we can talk about bathroom accessibility for hours. That could be its whole episode. Trust me, it has become one of my favorite parts of the job of hanging out in bathrooms. And I'm sure you get to do that a lot. What other spaces in a building?
Other spaces that we want to take a look at include corridors and hallways. We want to make sure that the hallways have an appropriate compliant width and that any doors that swing out to them don't obstruct the flow of traffic. As we mentioned before, with doors, we want to make sure that there's enough space in front of them. In addition to that, we want to make sure that there's enough space when the door is open to maneuver around that open door. We also take a look at any control panels or wall-mounted areas that you can fiddle with, like light switches, thermostats, security control buttons, anything like that. We want to make sure that...
Fire alarms?
Very much so.
However, we do recommend you do not fiddle around with the firearms, as those are serious devices only to be used in the case of emergency. Gotta put that little disclaimer in there.
Yeah, we don't want to see any devices that are mounted on the wall. We don't want to see them over 48 inches above the floor. And that's just to accommodate a broader range of reach ranges so that a person can actually reach and operate the device.
Yeah, it would really suck if you used a wheelchair and you had at most maybe 47 inches of reach and the fire alarm is at a 60-inch mark. If the building's on fire, that ain't gonna be too helpful now, ain't it?
Nope. So that's why we want to make sure that when you're measuring from the top of the interactive part, not just the bottom of the control panel, the bottom of the light switch, the bottom of the thermostat. We want to measure to that, what we call the operable part.
Okay. And that fully makes sense. You want to make sure that it is fully usable in that usable range for at least the most people. Because as we said, ADA is not perfect. Yeah, don't get me wrong, it's a great law. It put in some amazing standards, giving a lot of people like us opportunities that we wouldn't have had before. And I hate to admit it because I was born a month after this law was signed. It is an old law. It has gotten dated. I hate calling myself old because I'm very young. But it's dated. Yeah. It needs some more work. And it was a law just like any other where there was some negotiation put in. And we know working when it comes to accessibility, there's unfortunately no such thing as perfect, right?
Very much so. We can only try to use universal design and an inclusive design in order to find a grounds that works for everyone as much as possible.
And I know another area that we've explored when it comes to accessibility is signage. And I believe signage all the characters need to remain in that 48 to 60 inch range.
In general, yes. For what the ADA calls fixed room spaces, or spaces that have a function that does not change, such as restrooms, conference rooms, very specific spaces such as break rooms, etc. Those spaces need to be indicated with signage. And under the ADA, signage should not be mounted higher than a person's general reach range, and that is between 48 inches and 60 inches. We always tend to recommend that it be mounted closer to that 48 inch mark just to open up that space and increase the usability of the sign.
Yeah. And we're also looking at Braille as a key feature. So individuals who use Braille as their primary tool of reading and seeing and identifying spaces have that information.
Yes. In addition to Braille, the characters, the text, the words should also be raised so that you can actually feel them. Not every person with a vision-related disability uses Braille, and so providing that option is a welcome feature.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is a true fact that thanks to advancements in technology, such as audiobooks and screen reading technology and the such, Braille literacy has dropped off quite a bit. It is not at the level it once was. So there are a lot less people who are using that Braille, but it is still helpful for those that do rely on it and should not go away.
Very much so. In addition, we want to make sure that the letters on the sign contrast with the background of the sign.
Now you're speaking my language. Yeah, contrast is so important. I hate going to restaurants when they use that yellow and red font scheme on menus. I know there's some science behind it of the colors yellow and red make people hungry, but man, it is so hard to see those menus.
So that's what we tend to look at for signage. Again, every fixed room space has to have it. Moving on, we tend to look at what's called dining spaces. Under the ADA, a certain percentage of the total dining spaces must be made accessible. For instance, what you find in a restaurant dining room. In general, the ADA requires 5% of the total options of seating spaces must have an accessible seating space. And that means the table height is around 34 inches to ensure that a person doesn't have to use a table surface that is at their chin level or higher. That can be quite uncomfortable. In addition to that, another thing the ADA requires that these accessible spaces be dispersed amongst all the possible styles of seating. So you might have booth seating, you might have table seating, you might even have bar seating. And there has to be an accessible space at each.
Okay, so people with disabilities and those who need that accessible space, because we're not just talking about people with disabilities when we talk about accessibility, but this ensures that individuals who need those accessible features can interact in all spaces, that they're not just shoehorned into that's your corner.
Very much so. Want them to have the choice to choose what space works best for them.
Love it. So, when we're talking interior buildings, what's the issue you see the most?
One of the issues that we frequently find when doing evaluations of facilities out in public, door weights. Frequently what we encounter is doors can be heavier than that 5-pound maximum, and that's often because the original design of the facility didn't account for what are called door closer devices. Now, these are the little lever hydraulic devices that are mounted at the door that automatically close the door. While it's very good for having a door that automatically closes, it also makes it significantly heavier to operate. And so when we find a door like that with a door closer, we always recommend and inform managers and other decision makers that you can adjust them so that they can be lighter. And so you can actually have that lighter 5-pound door.
I feel like that's one of those things that not a lot of people realize is available. Like with ceiling fans, how there's a little lever that lets you switch which way the fan rotates. Never knew that existed until somebody pointed out to me. And I think that's true with these door weights, is until a manager knows about them, this isn't something that they think about too often.
Very much so. Another common area that we encounter out in the public is that the spaces are wonderful. A lot of care might have been taken to ensure that there's wide rooms, everything's mounted at a good height, and then the movers come in with the furniture, and they create narrow spaces that can be difficult to maneuver through with chairs and sofas and tables. And while the structure itself is wonderfully accessible, the furniture can make that easily inaccessible.
As most builders, designers, architects, they're familiar with ADA code.
Yes, that is a very significant step in their training.
But some people who are setting up spaces might not be familiar with it.
Very much.
And
so.
it's that lack of knowledge and insight that can often create some of the biggest barriers.
Yes, very much so. If you have a heavy table and there's very narrow routes around it, it can be very difficult to maneuver through a space, especially if you have a larger device.
Okay. So I'm going to get you to give a plug, and it's going to be a positive plug. Can you think of a space in our community that like really excelled in not just meeting ADA code, but going beyond it?
Areas that have gone to above and beyond what the ADA have or requires. I would have to say there are a couple champions of accessibility in the Grand Rapids area. Some include some areas of the DeVos Performance Hall, DeVos Convention Center. A lot of care and thought went into making sure that the individual event spaces, the restrooms, have been go above and beyond what's required for the ADA. For instance, using automated toilets, automated faucets, so you don't have to fiddle with any mechanisms. Using power doors on
It's so much more hygienic now, having it. I want to touch as few things as possible when I'm in a bath.
In addition to that, they provide single-user restrooms, or instead of having a large restroom designed for multiple people at a time with stalls, they've got individual restrooms that a person with attendant can easily access. They're larger, have that 60 to 67 diameter turning circle. They've utilized a lot. Important to know that sometimes areas might become congested and might become difficult to use simply due to the amount of people that travel through them. But in general, that is a very accessible space.
There's nothing we can do about people occupying this space.
Very correct.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I walk around with a white cane. There's things I can do to handle congestion. Actually, most people just fear I'm going to hit them in the shin, so they just get out of the way. I call it the sighted person shuffle. Yeah, I'm like Moses and just part the seas. Okay, so DeVos Performance Center is one of those really a key space in our community where a lot of events take place, and that is wonderful to hear that it has some great accessibility. And one of our friends of the podcast who will be talking to in the future, the Gerald R. Ford International Airport, another one that you've worked a lot with, consulting on spaces.
Yes, we have had a long partnership with the Gerald R. Ford International Airport. They've come to us to review their blueprints, a service we provide for accessibility. And in addition, we've provided what we call site reviews, which we go out to the physical space and evaluate the accessibility of it.
Why is that valuable for somebody to bring you in for, let's start with the consulting piece. Why is it valuable to have you come in and consult on that blueprint phase?
Oh, it's a very useful time to get into the process as early as possible. As we like to say here, it's a lot easier to move walls on paper as opposed to moving walls in real life. We can easily get a good idea of how things might be able to, as we like to say here, it is easier to move things on paper as opposed into real life. On paper, we get to easily plan ahead about how a space might be used, how it might be furnished, and ensure that it remains accessible and that is translated into real life.
Yeah, and not only is it easier, it's significantly cheaper. Yeah, to fix things ahead of time before the brick and mortar is laid, before the walls are erected, before you painstakingly drywall the space. Trust me, I learned this when building a bathroom in my house. It's a lot easier to do that planning ahead than trying to go back and fix. And again, anybody who's ever done any remodeling knows that it's significantly better to do it right the first time than go back and fix it. So you offer the service to provide your expert knowledge on ADA code as well as how to go above and beyond it, looking at that blueprint phase.
Yes, we provide the service. We then, after taking a look at the blueprints, we write up a report with our recommendations and observations. We also provide insight on how to use universal design, inclusive design, to go beyond the ADA. After all, you can always do better.
Okay. Now, for those who have unfortunately already passed the blueprint phase, they already got their established building. What service do you provide there?
We provide site reviews. Now, we believe that it is very important to have a site review performed. This allows us to check to make sure that everything's mounted correctly, the doors are properly tuned, the furniture is adequately placed, just to give people that understanding of their current environment.
And look, ADA code is, we've talked about a few things today. We are really just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much that goes into it. I think there's 20 different markers to look at when it comes to doorways.
Very much so. The ADA has over 400 technical guidelines. And so it is very important to go through a process, to go down that list, to check for everything, make sure that it's accessible under the ADA.
Now, I'm sure there are some businesses out there that are sitting there like, why? Why do I need to ensure accessibility? Why do I need to make sure my space is accessible for individuals? What would you say to them?
Well, it's good for business. If a person feels like they can use a space, if their expectations that they can enter are well-founded, that's good for business. They will feel welcome. They will do business with your business.
So it's not good for business to tell people we don't want you in here. You want to make sure that the most people are able to utilize your space, because frankly, if a place is not wheelchair accessible, I'm not going there with my friends who use a wheelchair. So you're not just losing them as a customer, you're losing me as a customer. You're losing our larger group of friends. You're losing that wedding party that might have an elderly family member who utilizes various mobility aids. People think about who they want included, and if they can't be included, they're not going to use that space. So it ensures that the most people can use that space. And the other thing, it's kind of the law. So it's good for business, and it's good to not be in violation.
Very much so. One of the areas that the ADA also touches upon is that if a space is inaccessible, non-compliant, no efforts have been made to plan for removing any potential areas that might not be in compliance, that does open them up for legal responses.
Okay. So if anybody would like to utilize your consulting service, your site review service, they can just go to our website, dakc.us, or call us at 616-949-1100 and ask for Jackson.
Yes, I am part of the accessibility part of our advocacy department, and I will get you and be able to set up a time to discuss any particular projects that you might have that you want us to look at, and we can provide that guidance on accessibility.
And to say you've reviewed a large portion of the city already is no understatement. Like, I have personally seen you review numerous sites around our city and the amazing work that gets done and the changes that get made to make spaces better. I know there's been some consulting on some upcoming large construction projects. We don't have to name drop them, but ensuring that the future of our city remains accessible. Uh, when it comes to ADA code, what do you feel is one of the biggest failures of the code? Something that like got neglected that you wish was?
I think one of the most disappointing areas of the ADA is not directly stating that it is okay to go beyond the bare minimum recommendations that the ADA outlines. Frequently, architects, engineers, those types of professionals, they are interested in complying with the ADA and only the ADA, and tend to disregard universal design, inclusive design. And so I would think that eventually down the road that it becomes far more clearer.
Okay, so I take it you get sick of telling people that they don't have to just meet the code, they should exceed the code.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, we mentioned a few times universal design, inclusive design. Different people have different thoughts on the two terms. Is there a favorite for you?
Language can be tricky, and so I always try to use the language that any of our partners, any of our clients tend to use. You can use universal design, you can use inclusive design, you can even use a new term called UX or user-based design.
Okay. The language is constantly evolving. Wonderful. Well, Jackson, I truly feel what you offer to our community is a vital service that everybody can benefit from. Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
I think that the message that I'd leave the audience with is it's always important to consider accessibility when planning ahead for any projects that you have. And to consider it as early as possible.
Okay. You heard the man. Don't hesitate. Don't wait to call. 616-949-1100. Disability Advocates is here to help. Jackson, once again, thank you so much. Keep up the fantastic work, sir.
Thank you.
Jackson is such a wealth of knowledge, and I can't overstate how much value comes from the information he has on the Americans with Disabilities Act. When it comes to accessibility standards, we really cannot go far enough. We want to make sure that our spaces are truly accessible, so I highly encourage anybody who owns or operates or is even designing a new space, do reach out to Jackson, have him come over and check out your space and get any tips and tricks available to ensure that your space is as inclusive as possible. The value will be evident. Now, on our next episode, we will be having our first kind of session with an individual with a disability telling their story. And this is something I really want to emphasize. We want to feature on this podcast. So if you or you know of somebody have a story you want to tell, or even a conversation you want to have about any aspect of disability life, we want to be that platform to share that story. So don't hesitate to reach out like this amazing individual, Dahlia, did. And next week, we will hear about her story. Once again, this has been John Couchy with Flattening the Curb, a podcast brought to you by Disability Advocates. For more information on our organization, engage with us on social media and visit our website at dakc.us. Like and subscribe, hit that notification bell to be alerted when our next episode drops. And remember, you can't have inclusion without accessibility. So let's build a more inclusive world, one story at a time.